Righty Jody, journos, we're back. It's been an international break. We've had a little bit of time to ourselves, haven't we, lads? I know there's been a clamour for to get some videos up there, so...
From Dom's mum.
Pretty much, shout out to Don Oscar.
Biggest critic.
Yeah, we've just been enjoying a bit of time. Been a busy period, I think. If you guys out there felt the busy period, the players definitely will have, and we as journalists have as well. Been halfway across Europe and back and up and down to Bournemouth and other places, so it's been a busy time, but we're back. We're going to talk about a few key talking points that have maybe arisen over the last week or so since we were at Bournemouth, mainly focusing on injuries, bit of transfer type talk as well, because I know that's the type of thing that you guys like to hear, our insight and little bits of knowledge that we have in that regard, and also the major developments this week with regards to the Premier League votes on related party sponsorship, and also on the big one, which was potential loans in from ownership connected clubs. I probably haven't put that in the most eloquent of ways, but I think you all know exactly what I'm talking about, right? Obviously, you know who we are. We're here. Jump in the comments if you want to talk about what we're talking about. We're really responsive. We love your interaction, so keep it going. And obviously like, comment, share, subscribe. You know the drill. Right, come on to you guys. I suppose maybe we shouldn't just what we're doing here. Actually, we're just sort of sitting. We've taken a bit of time to come for a pub lunch, haven't we? Yeah. We're in North Tyneside in a place called Backworth for pub lunch. I think.
No alcohol.
No alcohol, because we're all actually playing football tonight as well. So we didn't want to be stumbling about the pitch more so than we would be anyway. Right, yeah, we're in the pavilion in Backworth for a little pub lunch. What we're talking about today, guys, I think we're probably the best stuff to start before we come on. I think the kind of transfers and the vote kind of link in with each other. So maybe let's just assess the injury situation, because it's been a busy international breakdown. Where do we find ourselves at the moment?
People wondering why I've got my laptop here is just because there's so many injuries. You want to try and rattle them off the top of your head, but it's easier said than done. Obviously, you've got, I'll read them off, Jacob Murphy, Dan Burn, Callum Wilson, Elliot Anderson, Sven Botman, Harvey Barnes, then you've Miguel Almiron, Fabian Schär, Alexander Isak, Javier Manquillo, Matt Targett, and then Lewis Hall, obviously ineligible to play against his parent club Chelsea this weekend, and Sandro Tonali, 10-month betting ban. So I think that's, 13 players who can't play this weekend. So it's basically almost half of Eddie Howe's 25-man squad. So hopefully...
I forgot you listed. Did you mention Lewis Hall as well?
Yes.
Oh, it's a blow, that.
Disaster.
It is a blow.
Yeah, I've just said it. He's ineligible because he can't play against Chelsea. But fortunately, and I'll come to you, Jordan, potentially or hopefully we're going to have a few back. Bruno being a big one from suspension. He, not a player I included on that list, but a few from injury as well.
Yeah, Alexandra, Isak and Miguel Almiron, expect them to be fit for Saturday. Isak's been out for, what was it, a month now? Yeah, after that recurring thigh injury that he picked up against Borussia Dortmund.
Big loss, isn't he?
It was a big loss, and his expected return is even bigger and more needed now, because obviously Callum Wilson's 6 weeks absence. But yeah, Isak comes back in. I suspect. I mean, we were sort of talking off camera about starting 11 at Newcastle United against Chelsea. They don't have another recognised striker unless they persist with Anthony Gordon up there. So you'd suspect, if fit enough, Alexander Isak probably will come straight back into the starting 11. But what they've got to do as well with Isak is be mindful of his workload and fitness, just as they try to do with Callum Wilson, and look what happens. So there's going to be a lot of workload and strain on Isak to lead the line, so they have got to be careful. Busy period, we mentioned at the start there, busy period. The busy period doesn't stop. I think it's 9 games in December, so there's so many games, and Isak, as I say, is only recognised striker. But yeah, positive news, I think he will be back on Saturday. Miguel Almiron was a player that, was it a half an hour win against Bournemouth? He picked up a hamstring injury, and fortunately I think it was a grade 1 injury, as they call it, which was a maximum of 2 weeks out. So he withdrew from the Paraguay squad and has managed to recover. So, Eddie Howe spoke about the 2-week international break coming at a very good time for Newcastle. It certainly did in that sense, because, as I say, you've got Almiron there and Isak, who they've pretty much had time to get back fit. I think there was a bit of concern maybe around Fabian Schär at the start of the week because he missed the Switzerland's, was it against Israel on Thursday last week, which was obviously such a quick turnaround from the Bournemouth game. Fabian Schär, I think, in that Bournemouth game actually picked up a bit of a knock himself, so that Israel game was just to be given a little bit of rest. He came back into the Switzerland squad for the games against Kosovo and Romania. Yes, unused substitute, which in many ways is a positive for Newcastle because he hasn't played football, and you could probably look at it in a way of it being a rest for him. So 3 players there who they should have available for the weekend, but as you mentioned there, Dom, still a very lengthy injury list. I think was it 13 potentially, well 10 10 unavailable if them 3 players do return, which is still a lengthy injury list. I think it's comfortably the worst in the Premier League. So a little bit of positive news, but Newcastle still in many ways are a bit stretched. Yeah,
definitely. And Alexander Isak coming back hopefully would be a major boost. I think you're looking at the team and how it's going to line up now. Bruno coming back, I touched on him beforehand. How big a boost is that then?
Oh, it's massive. I kind of want to just roll it back a touch. Can we just dispel this bizarre Eddie Howe thing that he keeps mentioning when talking about reserve strikers? I think we've seen obviously Anthony Gordon has shown he can actually fill that role reasonably well. A different profile, closer to Isak than Wilson, does give you a bit more dynamism. Joe Linton, no. Sorry Eddie, no. We've seen he went back up there for half an hour or so against Bournemouth, and I think if Howe had any doubts whether Joe Linton was still a striker, he will surely now know that Joe Linton is not a striker and cannot play that role, even though he has.
I thought he wasn't a midfielder either.
Well, I don't think he is. No, I don't think he is.
Controversial opinions, check it out.
What is a Joe Linton? No, I think his best position for Newcastle United is on that left-hand side, and I think he works really well interchanging with Joe Willock. The thing about it now is it's just who's fit and available. You mentioned Bruno, it's huge. Dom, it genuinely is. Like, I think people only realise how good he is when he's not there, and when it's one of those that yes, he isn't the perfect footballer. He lacks a yard. He can dwell a little bit too much sometimes. He can give the ball away. It's often because he's trying to do things. Yeah. That's the way I see it. But when he's not in that team, it doesn't work and it doesn't tick. There's actually a few players like that, and my biggest concern with these fears about potential Longstaff being injured as well would be, does that midfield function? Does it function if Sean Longstaff's injury keeps him out of that game? I mean, we suspect it isn't anything longer term. I think you're just checking was he even on
he's
that
not
list.
Even on the list, which obviously
he
has got an ankle injury, doesn't he?
So he's one that he was brought back into the team and gave Newcastle United those legs and allowed players like Bruno to do the work that he does, allowed Joe Willock, Joe Linton, others to influence games. I fear if he doesn't play, but having Bruno back in does make Newcastle United tick over again. There is a familiarity in that midfield if you go back to maybe having Joe Linton and Joe Willock or whoever it may be alongside them, and I think Newcastle United, although Chelsea are on a resurgence, I'm not amazingly worried about what Chelsea can offer, as I think if Newcastle United can play at the levels that they showed against Arsenal, the levels that they showed against Manchester United, and others previously in the Premier League, then I think they'll be fine against Chelsea. And Isak's massive to that. How fit is he? He hasn't played. He's going to be thrown in at the deep end. He's going to be asked to do a lot of minutes, a lot of yards, and I worry for the likes of his hamstrings. And these type of players do get these injuries. But in the short term, he should be all right, having had a fair rest and got himself back up to the level that's needed. And he is really key to. You talk about Bruno and losing something in the midfield. You lose something in the forward line massively when Isak doesn't play, because even when he's not scoring goals, he's the man who, with that speed that he's got, he leads the press really, really well, and he triggers the press for others to go. Wilson hasn't got that same. He can do, but not at the same intensity and levels. So I think even if he's not scoring goals, Isak, he makes a massive difference. He pulls people around. Defenders don't know whether he's going to go short, go wide, go over the top. He can do any of that, which again, Wilson to a lesser extent can do, but not to the same quality and levels. So he will be a huge boost, and it gives Chelsea, who for me haven't always looked the most secure as a back line. It gives
4 goals conceded last time.
Yeah, and albeit that game was incredible.
Yeah.
It was incredible. And Chelsea have got, I mean, you look at their front line, they've got some. Do I say something? I'm not mad on the centre forward. I'm going to be brutally honest. I know he's got 7 goals or something this season.
Jackson.
I'm not mad on him. I don't particularly rate him as a player. He'll go and get a hat-trick of the weekend now. Mark this video. But I look at the dynamism on the other side. I think Raheem Sterling's probably played his best football in a long time, probably in the best 5 or 6 years. A player who's often flattered to deceive, whether that be a club or international level. I think he's actually really found a home and a place in this Chelsea team, and I've been very impressed. Particularly in that Man City game, I thought Raheem Sterling was as good as I've ever seen him, actually, I think. And Cole Palmer on the other side is a young lad playing without any pressure and a real lack of fear, and you can see that. Quite a languid style. He'll drift in and out and take players on, and obviously knows where the back of the net is, particularly from the penalty spot.
The only way he knows where the back of the net is this season from the penalty spot.
But yeah, no, I think I'm more worried about Newcastle United and what we can produce and what we can offer on the day. And I think with Isak back and Bruno back, there's the makings. The team at Bournemouth by half time had very much a feel of like a Carabao Cup second round game. That you just picked anybody and threw them in. The real quality injuries have robbed Newcastle of the quality that's taken them from the bottom end of the Premier League to the top end, and that quality comes in the shape of the players signed in the last. It's Isak in the front line, it's Botman in the back line, and it's Bruno in the middle. I kind of want to. Shall I tell that story about Botman? Yeah, I'll tell it. Right. No, so I bumped into Sven Botman in Jesmond Dean at the weekend with his other half and his lovely little dog. I'm not sure he looked like a man who was moving all that freely, because I've seen a lot of talk of saying he's back out and he's potentially going to be fit. I mean, I'd love to be surprised, but he didn't look like a man who was particularly knocking on the door for this game. But I suppose we'll have to wait and see how much can you judge from a man plodging through some mud in Jesmond Dean with his lovely expensive trainers on. But he didn't look amazingly fit to me, being brutally honest. The rest, look, I think the rest of the injury list, it's a shame. I see that name on the list, that Elliot Anderson. I think it's a real shame for him, because this is a period where he would have been playing week in, week out, and this is where he would have probably established himself, I believe. I think he would have made his mistakes, learned. He probably would have chipped in with a couple of goals, a couple more assists. He's turned into, he's a tenacious tackler and chase and run and press. He's been a miss. I think all of the players, it's hard to go through the list and say there isn't somebody who hasn't been missed. Even just the options like Murphy's and Barnes and everybody, when you go down the whole list. Matt Targett would have been playing games now, improved against Manchester United. He almost rekindled that old sort of view that we had of him, which was that 6-month period where they took him from Aston Villa, and he transformed Newcastle United's backline by being a really good attacking option on the left hand side of that defence, where it was crosses galore. He was probably more of a prolific crosser than Kieran Trippier even in that period, and Newcastle hadn't seen that when he was dropping in and out the team last season, but looked to be that again against not Manchester United. It was the game previous, wasn't it?
Man City. Yeah,
Man City, and he looked to be back to those kind of levels. So yeah, I think it's been a bruising time, but I think I'm not looking forward to December. I'm going to be brutally honest. That's not taking me journalist hat off. I love games. I love going to games. Can't wait for it. Can't wait to be back in action. If I put my fan hat on, I'm not really looking forward to December. I do have fears that December could be the month where things are derailed. Look, logic tells you things are going to go south in some ways because of the amount of players available, the 3 competitions, the level of competition in those competitions. We're playing PSG away, AC Milan, then Chelsea away in the 3 competitions, as well as the league run, which involves a lot of tough, bruising games, particularly Manchester United home, Chelsea at home. At the end, Spurs away, Everton away, who Everton are in great form. Forget the ban. The 10 points. They're in great form. They're probably the best Everton team that's been in a good few years, to be honest. So it's a tough place to go back. Yeah, I don't really fancy that trip to Goodison on a bloody Thursday night.
It's always a midweek Thursday night. I'm sure they've done a Thursday night a few years ago.
Staying at that Airbnb again?
No. Did we do a video on that? No. So
Before-
nobody would have
before
seen
Jordan
that.
Journals.
But yeah, Dom had were staying over this time. We've been glamping. We've been everywhere with Dom. He's amazing with his choices. This one was probably the biggest hovel I've ever seen in Liverpool, with bunk beds, and it was at the top
Above a kebab shop.
above a kebab shop. It wasn't the best, but we saved National World money, and that's what it's all about, really. I've got to say with my management hat on now. Right, no, I don't know, I'm kind of exhausted, the injuries. I don't know if you've got anything else to say on that matter. It kind of, for me, brings you on quite seamlessly on to the idea of January, because we're only really a month away, like 5 weeks away from a transfer window opening, and we've seen a lot of talk this week, and we'll come on to the Neves particular stuff, but he's a player that's been linked. Kalvin Phillips is heavily linked. We've seen other players in other departments as well. Where do you think Newcastle United stand heading into that window? Where do you think the focus from the hierarchy is? Do you think they're going to go all in for one or two? Do you think they'll try and keep their powder dry? Or do you think Champions League football maybe sort of has a bit of a say on how much they go big in January, Dom?
Potentially, yeah, if they obviously get through, and then you've got that last 16 game to compete with. Potentially only 2 more games, potentially more. So I don't think it's something that will necessarily dictate Newcastle's spending as such. But obviously the big stress, you've got Sandro Tonali out. He was your big summer signing, £52 million. Half your summer transfer budget, that's gone for the rest of the season. But obviously they have to be mindful of financial fair play, which obviously people may roll their eyes at a little bit. So this is why the likes of Kalvin Phillips are being linked, and then a potential loans being looked at as well. Whether Man City would want to insert a obligation to buy into that remains to be seen, but Newcastle's interest is.
You mentioned Ashworth there. You guys both, obviously these two guys were sitting in with Dan Ashworth and got to speak to him first hand with regards, and there were questions, weren't there, about the idea of a January transfer window. I don't know if you want to remind everybody out there what Dan Ashworth said to you guys. Yeah,
he didn't explicitly say they would sign a midfielder, but he did say whether we look at someone like for like to Sandro, or someone who is in a similar role, but then someone else in the squad, maybe a Bruno or a Sean Longstaff, can then fill the role they envisage for Tonali. He was very, very vague, but it's clear that Newcastle are looking at the options. He also spoke about how they plan 2 windows in advance, whether the injuries impacts those plans. I imagine it probably will, but Newcastle will have had targets for this window initially, or at least areas that they'd be looking to strengthen. And one area, aside from the midfield, that I asked Eddie how about in the summer, which I thought was risk being a glaring issue and has been certainly at the moment, is the striker position. I mean, Liam, you spoke about, weirdly, although at the time, and it still is a good piece of business, selling Chris Wood for 15 million has almost come back to haunt Newcastle in some ways.
Yeah, I know, and it was almost like a flipping comment. I said at Bournemouth, but it was the £15 million mistake almost. It was great business. It was the right time to get rid of a player, but then to not replace him with anybody and expect Anthony Gordon and Joe Linton and Jacob Murphy, I think, was name checked at one point as a potential forward, was, in my opinion, a little bit of oversight. I think they need another body, and I think if they didn't realise that in the summer, I think they probably realise that now. Jordan, do you think that's probably the area they're going to focus on? Because we talk about midfield as probably the one they know they need to strengthen. They haven't got enough bodies in there. Do you think looking forward after that, or?
I think the main priorities will be a central midfielder because of the Tonali situation. I then think you've got to look at a centre half because of the Sven Botman situation and his absence now, which is approaching 2 months, longer than 2 months. It just shows that they're very, very light in that position. In many ways, they've been fortunate that Jamal Lascelles and Fabian Schär have stayed fit, because you then, if either of those two drop out, you're looking towards Emil Kraft and Paul Dummett. And look, they were excellent against Manchester United in that cup tie, but I think to have to rely on those 2 players who in many ways okay. Paul Dummett's probably been seen as a centre half for a good few years now, but Emil Kraft is still sort of on the edge of being a full back and a centre half. So I think you're really light in that area if one of the two fit centre halves was to get injured. So I think the Botman situation probably will make Newcastle look again in January to look at a centre half. Now, one thing that Dan Asher mentioned was that if there's an opportunity in January for Newcastle to sign the right player, they'll go and do it, and maybe see in this January that there is that opportunity, because they need it. As I say, they've been really light in that area. The forward position, made a really good point about the striker situation. I think Eddie Howe's tried to cover the fact that they haven't signed a third striker by going, well, look, Anthony Gordon can play there, or Jacob Murphy can play there, but it's not an out-and-out striker. And as we've seen with Callum Wilson and Alexander Isak's injury record, both great players, but because the players they are so explosive, they pick up injuries and they need a fallback option. And perhaps it would be good if Newcastle can maybe look to sign someone with versatility who can play across the front three. Who that is, I don't know. But certainly the injury situation, just as a coffee machine goes off in the background there, if anyone
it doesn't. They don't want to. They don't want you to get that point across.
Yeah, I mean, I'm talking about a versatile forward in January. Are there many out there? If so, yeah, Newcastle need one, because as we've seen with the injury situation, not just the midfield etc. or Tonali, but certainly the attacking positions as well have been a little bit depleted in light, as was seen by Eddie Howe almost, and maybe desperation, the fact that he had to bring on Ben Parkinson to try and change the game against Bournemouth. So yeah, very long-winded point that, but my point is I think the three positions at Newcastle you look at is centre midfield first, centre back second, and then a striker / versatile forward third.
Yeah, and just to go back on the point I said before, when I asked Eddie Howe if he was comfortable with the striker situation, he did name check the likes of Anthony Gordon and Jacob Murphy and
Harvey Barnes.
Harvey Barnes, yeah. And he actually said strikers, the price range Newcastle will be looking at it, and the type of player, the quality of player they'll be looking to get was just out of the budget in the summer, based on the money they'd already spent at that point. So what they do in January, I'm not sure. Whether they go cheap or try and get a young player in, or even a loan signing, those are all options to Newcastle. But yeah, what Eddie Howe said in the summer is there wasn't the money available to buy a striker.
They've taken a chance, haven't they? What they've done is they've looked at the squad, see where do we really need to strengthen. They've thrown all the eggs in one basket with Tonali, and which way you want to look at it, they've been let down by the player. Largely, they've signed somebody who isn't able to play football, taking all matters out of the equation. So if you look at it purely from a budget perspective, they use a lot of their budget on a player who now can't play football. So they will be disappointed with that. That could have gone towards a striker. I think that probably would have been, if they'd seen striker as a priority, they would have thrown the money at it, much like they did this summer before. So they've taken a chance hoping that they wouldn't get, they managed Wilson and Isak really well last season. Isak's injury probably led to Wilson's injury. Wilson having to do the recovery 3 days later and then start again, even though he wasn't necessarily getting any more minutes than he was last season. That over-reliance upon Wilson and having to make sure that he played rather than be a supplement to Isak made a big difference, and I think that's probably why we find where we are today. But hopefully that's a lesson they'll learn, to say that if Wilson is to stay at the football club, which we expect he will, then they're going to need probably another to cover, and ideally somebody who can cover probably across the front three is the way you would look at it. You'd maybe look to sign a forward who can also play wide, rather than, as we mentioned, the 3 or 4 other players in the squad who are wide players who can play forward. Kind of brings us on to the January thing, the vote this week. I don't know how much time we want to place on that, or...
Well, that was something Dan Ashworth very much intentionally, I'd imagine, hinted out when we spoke about it, because he spoke off the record, obviously, which we can't quote him on, but he did say there could be something on the horizon, and that was about 2 weeks before it actually came about, the actual vote. So yeah, it's happened. I probably imagine Dan Ashworth was well in the loop at that point, and I guess fortunately for Newcastle, there's been 3 votes since the takeover, almost with the intention of restricting Newcastle, or that's the way it seems. And the initial one about what was it, the commercial deals, party-related commercial deals, didn't pass back in 2021. Sorry, did pass back in 2021. These 2 ones, the loan signings and the commercial deals, where it's like they need to prove they have multiple offers of the same value.
Ludicrous, by the way.
Which is so... It's mad. It's like if I was to sell you a player and it's like, oh, you need to prove you have exactly the same value.
I can't sell you my house because you're my mate. I can't sell you. I've got to make sure that other people are bidding exactly the same. I'm sorry, but that's not how business works, and you know that. And that's the most ridiculous thing about it.
I don't think there's any surprise that deal, that proposal didn't go through. I'd say it was slightly surprising that the owner parties...
There was a lot of briefing to a lot of very senior journalists from, I assume, senior sources within either football clubs or the Premier League that had given everybody the impression that this would pass and would pass quite easily, and it just wasn't the case. I think there was a few unexpected names, maybe a Burnley and a couple of others in that mix who you thought, oh, why would they be involved? Of course, Everton may be part of a group very soon with regards to the MultiC Club. Manchester United didn't vote in favour, you would expect that they did, in the way that you expect that they did, because they probably, in the not too distant future, are going to have very big connections with the likes of Nice, through Jim Ratcliffe, etc. The multi-club model is probably here to stay. Like, I think, for me, there are, I've got big ethical question marks about whether it's right or wrong. I think it probably is wrong. I don't think you should have it. I think being able to trade between clubs with the same owners probably isn't right. But the biggest point on this whole thing isn't the rules themselves that they want changed. It's the timing. It's the fact that now all of a sudden the Saudis have created Project Fear in the Premier League for me. All of a sudden, all because the Saudis, because these aren't problems that are new. These are things that have happened for a long time. Just go back to Frank Lampard getting taken off Chelsea. Pretend he traded over to America and then all of a sudden starts playing for Manchester City. It was all wrong, but nobody was bothered about that then. They're all bothered about it now because they look at the elite in the Premier League, look at Newcastle United and PIF and the Saudis as a very real threat to everything they've been trying to establish over the last few years, and that includes the breakaway league that they tried to get involved in. They wanted to hive off the money, hive off the success, hive off progress to a certain amount of clubs. Newcastle United have blown that open. Brighton are doing their best to blow it open. Aston Villa are doing their best to blow it open. And for me, long may it continue, because there's certain football clubs in there who don't necessarily deserve a right to success. No football club deserves a right to success and a right to all progress in English football. It's meant to be an open house, and that's the way everybody wants it to continue. So that, to me, is the biggest thing to take from this. I think anybody who gets upset or angry, take it as the biggest compliment going. They're scared. All the football clubs are scared of what they see what's happened in such a short space of time in Newcastle United. I mean, largely due to the money brought in. The sponsorship hasn't even started yet. The major investment hasn't really started yet, and they're already in the Champions League and they're already in the mix. Yes, Newcastle United will drop out of that again this season, but they'll be back again and they'll learn lessons from it and come again. The learning curve season for me, and everyone else sees that, and they see the trajectory Newcastle United are on, and they're scared. And that's the biggest compliment you could pay to the owners and the way that they've ran the football club so far. They've done it perfectly. Now, the bit that I would say is in question is, and you touched upon it, very much feels like a bit of a plant by Dan Ashworth. Ruben Neves is a player that they like. I think Eddie Howe even suggested, he said on record, didn't he, that he was a player that he liked.
Yes.
Yeah, at Wolves, liked him when he played at Wolves. So it's a player that they like, but I think it's massively in question whether they even go and do deals in this marketplace, and they look to the 4 Saudi football clubs to take players on loan from. It would be an easy solution, but I think they're probably more likely to find more suitable solutions elsewhere, and the biggest suitable solution, I think, in Eddie Howe's eyes, looks to be Kalvin Phillips. I think there's obviously that England connection. There's already a relationship with people in and around there. I think it's one that could potentially happen. and could happen quite easily, because I know his time at Manchester City is done. That's the information that I've heard from people over there, is that there is no, I don't really think there's any coming back at Manchester City. I actually think that was the case in the summer, and it was more the player who decided that he would rather stay and fight it out. I think if it had anything up to the manager and the hierarchy at Manchester City, they would have cut their losses a year into it and said, look, he just isn't the guy for us. Which brings me on to the question, is he really the guy for Newcastle United? I loved him at Leeds. Only have to go back to not the last tournament, but the tournament previous for England, and he played a role which, if he plays that role and could get that level of fitness, which was much more than a sitter, he was a box-to-box in that England midfield at the Euros, where he almost played like an 8, and he looks like he would fit perfectly in this team. We haven't seen anything like that Kalvin Phillips for the last, how many years is it now? Is that 3 years ago?
2 years, 2.5.
2.5 years. We haven't seen that Kalvin Phillips for a while. If that Kalvin Phillips could come to Newcastle United and play that role, and he's always had, look, you only have to go back, was it Bielsa talked about his fit, no, it was Guardiola talked about his fitness and others. If you can go back to that Kalvin Phillips, get him playing like he was at Leeds and for England at that time, he'd be a great addition. Having seen him, he was played at St James's Park not all that long ago. I didn't think he was a disaster at St James's Park, but he wasn't a Manchester City midfielder. Makes us wonder, is he a Newcastle midfielder? It was all very slow. It was all very slow going through him. And Newcastle play with that bit more zip. They don't play the way that sort of Gareth Southgate England play, where it's all very backwards and sideways, slow build up, finding gaps. Newcastle United is very much built on absolutely breaking down doors and flying into those gaps, using pace, physicality, fitness, everything about it. Kalvin Phillips will have to hit the ground running really in that respect, and I'm not sure he could. Is he a quality player? Yes. Is he the player that Newcastle United need at this moment in time? Well, actually, probably yes, because they could do with anybody at this moment in time, given they've got so few bodies. Is he the perfect fit? He'll have a lot to prove, in my opinion, for the medium term. Is can he become that player he was at Leeds and for England in that major tournament?
Yeah.
I've gone all over there.
Yeah, no, to be fair, if anyone's still watching after half an hour, then thank you, because it's been a very long one. I think we've covered all bases we said we would at the start, although the start feels like a very long time ago now.
Could almost split it into 2 videos, couldn't it?
Yeah. I think, I suppose my 2 pence on Kalvin Phillips, I think if it is a loan, for example, I think it makes sense because Newcastle need a body in that area. I think you can look at Kalvin Phillips's past and the way he was at Leeds. I thought he was a brilliant player. When he went to Manchester City for a £42 million, I thought it was an absolute steal.
I did too, yeah. I agree, actually.
But it just hasn't worked out for him. He's had several knockbacks of injuries. But I think if there's any manager in the Premier League that can restore a player's career, as Eddie Howe has shown at Newcastle with several other players that Steve Bruce almost writ off, mentioned he's in there, Eddie Howe can transform Kalvin Phillips. And for Kalvin Phillips' career, I think a move to Newcastle United under Eddie Howe would be a very good move for him. Okay, there's question marks over his current ability and the way he struggled at Leeds, but look, form is temporary, class is permanent, and I think Kalvin Phillips is a class player. He just needs the right manager. Well, that's not the right manager. Pep's a top quality manager, but he needs.
No, you're putting him there.
I think it's clear that he needs a change. And
if there's no belief there, like the manager, that's what you mean, isn't it? Like the manager doesn't believe.
Yeah, I'm not calling Pep Guardiola a bad manager.
But when there's no trust between the manager and player, the manager's already made his mind up. So Guardiola is absolutely the worst manager for everybody. Not well, Kalvin Phillips, everyone else is great.
No, I mean I put that point out terribly there, but I'm saying I think Kalvin Phillips needs a change, and if there's a club in the Premier League that's on the up with a top class manager in the making, it is Newcastle United. So I'm all in favour of the Kalvin Phillips deal if it can come to fruition.
Any final thoughts on the votes or anything like that, Jordan? I know you didn't really have a say on that one.
No,
I was surprised it didn't pass. I'm sort of glad it didn't either as well. Not because I think Newcastle are going to go sign Saudi players. It's just more. It's almost like 2 fingers up to everyone else.
It is. Yeah, you tried and you failed.
It's Newcastle at least have that choice, have that option. That window's not closed to them, and by the powers that be. So I just think it's a nice liberating week for Newcastle when they've had so much sort of animosity and objection to the ownership model, and some of it's warranted, some of it isn't, and I think it's a positive outcome for the club.
Right, cool. I think that's everything we've got to say. This is probably the longest video I've ever done.
It is,
Absolutely, yeah.
Try your best. Try your best to hang on in there. We do we do our best to give you guys updates, and it's been a while since we've seen you out there, so we thought we'd give you a little bit of a longer one. We've made up for it today. Right, you know the drill. Like, comment, share and subscribe. Get yourselves in the comments, click the bell.